On the floor here at the Results Operations Center, and what we're going to do now is really continue speaking to our analyst Makala Setlalogile. But we're also joined by a party that really is represented by quite the early riser. Wouter Wessels, always the earliest to arrive here at the Results Operations Center, and he's spokesperson, of course, for the Freedom Front Plus. Wouter, good morning. How are you feeling?
Good morning. I'm not an early riser by nature, so this is very bad. But yeah, no. It's an interesting and exciting election.
Well, and it's interesting that you are an early riser, and so generally you've been the earliest person that we've spoken to. Let me start with the national ballot, and then we'll get into some of the provincial results for your party that look quite different depending on where you are. But nationally, you sit at, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th place, just below the Patriotic Alliance. Is the Patriotic Alliance your biggest nemesis in this election?
No, I think the big thing is there's been a lot of shifts, a lot of new voters going out, a lot of shifts within the Western Cape. You have Mkhonto Sizwe as a new contender, actually contending. It's actually the ANC just split into two factions, so you have the ANC on 2 places on the results all of a sudden. Patriotic Alliance, I think, took a lot of votes from the ANC in the Western Cape as well. That's where they got the most of their votes. But yes, it's a fluid election. But yeah, we are places in your 7th place, 5th place, wherever you are. It's not really a reflection. At the end of the day, it's about how many representatives you have on provincial and national level, and also the quality of your representatives.
Yeah, I mean, in Gauteng, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th place in Gauteng. I mean, was your campaigning very focused on Gauteng?
It was focused on Gauteng. I think we fell a little back in Gauteng. We're doing quite well in Tshwane still. There's still a number of votes that still have to be captured from Gauteng, or from Tshwane polling stations. That will change the percentages, I think, a little in Gauteng. But yeah, we did focus on Gauteng, but also in a national election, you focus everywhere and you try to get all the votes that you can get at the end of the day.
Yeah, talk to me about what you feel is happening, if you're proud of what's happening in the Western Cape.
Western Cape, I think there was a lot of fear mongering that voters were forced to be scared that the Western Cape will be lost to the ANC. We know that there were certain polls that even showed the ANC on 35%, which was impossible because the ANC in 2019 only got 16%. So it was really propaganda that drove a lot of the electorate to rather vote for the current ruling party there because they were scared that the ANC would win the Western Cape if they did not.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I mean, when you look at the Western Cape, for instance, the Democratic Alliance is sitting at 53% of the vote. I mean, that's very, very strong there, followed by the ANC at 19%. Then the Patriotic Alliance at 3rd place, and you're sitting with only 1.7% of the vote in the Western Cape. Could it be that the messaging of the Democratic Alliance, as it did with its purging of the likes of Musi Maimane, was able to get back its electorate that had come to you with that move that they made in their positioning?
Not necessarily. Our data shows, not only our own data, shows that we made big inroads to even get more voters, to keep our base and to get more voters. Less than a week ago, we were still going strong. In less than 3 days, a lot of people said, let me just this time vote for the Democratic Alliance to save or to keep the Western Cape out of the hands of the ANC and nationally to win the ANC.
Yeah.
A lot of voters think that if they don't vote for the 2nd largest party, the ANC will win. They don't make the connotation that it doesn't matter who you vote for if you never voted ANC. But unfortunately, a lot of fear propaganda and don't vote for a smaller party. If you vote for a smaller party, that splits the vote and it's to the advantage of the ANC. that type of propaganda unfortunately works, and it's understandable. The electorate was very uncertain in this election. With all kinds of new contenders, the reference to the Doomsday Coalition made a lot of people very scared. And I think people voted emotionally against and not for in this election.
Well, that bell having gone off again, 97.07% now is where we're sitting. So it's gone off just by 0.02% up. Matala, do you agree with what has happened to what the voter is saying about what's happened to the Freedom Front Plus in the Western Cape? I mean, look at these numbers. The Freedom Front Plus in the Western Cape is sitting at 1.7%. The Patriotic Alliance is sitting in third position at 7.97%. What did they miss?
I think what a voter is saying is very speculative in terms of what might have influenced voter behavior and voter decisions. I mean, even if you factor in the national vote, the VF Plus was the wonder kid of the 2019 elections. I mean, as things stand now, they're likely to perform worse off compared to 2019. Their vote might be halved, because you'd remember that in 2019, they doubled the voter numbers from, I think, 165 to about 415 or so in 2019. Currently, they're sitting at it seems it's just a little over 200,000. As it stands, they're actually at 50% of what they were in 2019. The issue about fear-mongering, if that is the reason the VF Plus is going with, it will actually indicate the ineffectiveness of their campaign. One of the key issues or key objectives of political parties is voter education itself. Sometimes we tend to think that the IEC or voter education lies with the IEC alone, but political parties have a huge responsibility in that aspect. It was up to the party itself to ensure that the voters are conscientized and understood that a vote to what voter has termed smaller parties. That was funny, as someone would declare their own party a smaller party.
Smaller.
Smaller.
Yeah, so it's still the get out the vote strategies clearly was ineffective in terms of the party itself.
I must say, I remember 2019, we were, I was going to say here, but I suppose it was in Tshwane, at the showgrounds where the ROC was then. And at the time, Musi Mamani was still very much the leader of the Democratic Alliance, and he held a small media briefing wherein this was after the Freedom Front Plus had done incredibly well. Some experts and pundits saying, well, they took those numbers really from the Democratic Alliance. And Musi Mamani holding a press briefing there is talking about how the voter and South African politics is moving away from the center. Do you think, when you look at the numbers for the Freedom Front Plus, and even for a party like the EFF, for instance, that have lost ground, some would argue, that politics in the electorate is moving slowly back to the center?
Not necessarily, Naledi. Look, let me just start off touching by 2019 dynamics, and I'll get into your question now. Yeah. Remember the political climate leading up to the 2019 elections, right? There were a lot of contentious cultural issues, policy uncertainty and incoherence within the DA, transformation against transformative policies, where the Freedom Front Plus was steadfast behind the idea, especially that we're rising around the issues of culture, language, and all of that. So that was the political climate that might have ultimately favored the Freedom Front Plus. But in terms of moving more to the center, it's not necessarily the case, because the assumption is based on voters actually making an ideological shift. And I do not think that our voter behavior is influenced by ideology. Because I think we have entered an era of grievance politics in South Africa where personalities count more than parties.
So Wouter, let's talk about this now. What are the conversations, if at all, happening within the MPC, the multi-party charter?
It's too early at this stage. You can only
97% of the way in.
There's still a lot to happen in Gauteng, for instance, where that result will determine what can happen in Gauteng at the end of the day. Coalition talks can really actually only commence. You can start to feel the ground, but you can only make those decisions or those talks when there's final results and there's finality. So it's starting, but obviously nationally, there's no chance that the multi-party charter can form a coalition at this stage, and there will be other permutations nationally, which will most probably take the form of a minority government by the ANC, and where it will be a very interesting but also important term for the opposition to play a very important role if it's a minority government. With every budget, every piece of legislation, there will have to be certain trade-offs and negotiations to get anything through, but it might be to the advantage of the electorate out there. A hung parliament is sometimes more effective than any coalition government. So that might be to the advantage. Gauteng, there's still a chance for a multi-party charter type of coalition, although, yeah, we'll have to see how that works.
I mean, there have been whispers about a possible ANC-DA coalition. I mean, what would that mean, Matlala, for parties such as the Freedom Front Plus?
I think firstly, Naledi, let's just touch on the issue of the multi-party charter. It was a non-starter. The Moonshot Pact was a non-starter from the get-go. I think from a political strategy perspective, that was a brilliant concept by the DA to actually undermine and, subsume all of these smaller political parties, as Wouter has said. Because if you paid attention, the DA was actually decampaigning its supposed partners in the multi-party charter, which is something that Wouter himself actually acknowledged earlier when he said that the DA was on this fear-mongering that a vote for a smaller party is actually a wasted vote. So he actually captured the essence of the multi-party charter, of how much of a non-starter it was. So it was just a clear strategy from the Democratic Alliance.
So wait, hold on. Is that a betrayal? I mean, what does that feel like to hear that, to concede to that, if you will?
Politics is never a choice between what is the best strategy. It's sometimes what is the only strategy at a certain point in time. Multi-party charter is absolutely correct. Obviously, that gave, and a lot of the electorate saw that as different parties are now agreeing. They agree on principles, they form this agreement, so why then gamble with another party's vote? Why not vote for the bigger party in that grouping? So that is what happened, but it was very difficult. No party could at any stage say, no, I'm not going to form part of this, because parties that did that did also not do very well. Worse than us that did form part of it. It was a very difficult choice. It's not a betrayal, it was a pre-election agreement. Yes, I think that is how it went. But at the end of the day, we are entering a real new era in politics of multi-party governments. For the first time, the ANC is below 50%. There's no party that has a majority on national level. There's a lot of the electorate that didn't believe that that would ever be possible. It is now possible, and now our democracy will really mature, where people will start to see that multi-party governments will be possible.
Okay,
in the future.
so let me ask you this: the multi-party charter, as it stands, when you do then sit and start talking about coalitions, what then do you say as a party to the Democratic Alliance around what they do with their numbers? I mean, they're up on your screen right now, right? 40.1% for the ANC, so close but not quite there. It's 21% for the Democratic Alliance, 14% for the MK. So if we start looking at the chess table here, right, Wouter, an MK-ANC coalition puts them well above where they really need to be hitting. What does the DA need to be doing?
I can't speak on behalf of the DA. That's up
I mean, but
to
you'll
them.
be sitting with them and having a conversation with them about what to do with the numbers, right?
No, because you see, that's the misconception of the multi-party charter, and that's the difficult thing. The multi-party charter was an attempt to prevent what happened on local government level. Because remember, you only have 14 days to form a government. It's very, very difficult because everybody's horse trading for positions, which is actually completely wrong. Coalitions should be formed on what policies and what governance model we are going to implement. Not this person is getting minister of this and this person is getting that. That made coalitions on local government level very difficult. And that is why the idea was a pre-election agreement. But coalitions can only be formed after an election. Nobody is married before an election. It's only after an election. When the final result is there, you can form a coalition. That's the only thing.
All right, well, the ballot's just strong. Let's see those numbers, 97.11% of the way in. Matlala, do you agree with that? I mean, let's see. I mean, it's one thing to say that, well, you know, agreements between political parties are made according to the alignment of their policies and not the negotiations for positions. Is that really what we see? Number one. Secondly, let's look at the chess table now and the numbers that we're sitting with. At 97% of the way in. If you were the Democratic Alliance or the multi-party charter, what would you do with those numbers?
I think, Naledi, the first thing, the multi-party charter does not even constitute 50+1 of the vote. So that idea has been put to bed. The Democratic Alliance can form a coalition with either the ANC or the rest of the parties combined. But now what this means is that there is no way that if they leave the ANC out, there's no way that the Democratic Alliance can form a coalition government without the inclusion of the MK party. The way the numbers are actually looking, so for the Democratic Alliance, one would assume that the best sensible decision for them in terms of coalition governments would be the DA, rather the ANC. And it would make sense, because I say this, while we're talking about multi-party governments, this is essentially the results of political fragmentation, right? But in South African terms, are we really dealing with political fragmentation in its true sense, or are we looking at fragmentation of fractures of parties? If you look at the results on the scoreboard, you'll see that actually the number of parties coalesce around the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. The EFF, the MK, splinter parties of the African National Congress. You go to the Democratic Alliance, Action SA, BOSA, some of those, Good. There's a number of parties that are actually splinter parties of the DA as well. So in essence, we're dealing with two prominent political parties. From a stability perspective, the DA and the ANC coalition government would make sense, because now would be the aggregation of the varied interests or the diverse interests in society in a more stable way, rather than fracturing.
Where would that leave the MK party?
Not necessarily out in the cold, especially based in the provincial performances, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. Whether the ANC would want, and funny enough, remember that the leader of the MK party still declared himself a member of the ANC, I think, a few days leading up to the elections. So that's a very interesting issue that people still have to make their mind up, for. But in terms of the MK party, some of the demands I think they're putting on the table are very tough ones for the African National Congress to consider. And I think one of the key issues that political parties will consider before going to elections, or rather coalitions, what will this coalition mean for my future prospects as a political party? It's not necessarily about the now. Some people come out of, or some parties come out of coalition scathed. Some come out of coalition governments even stronger. So the future prospects will have to actually influence the decisions that political parties ultimately make in terms of coalitions going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because Wouter also earlier said that you're dealing with two ANCs. Yeah, he says the MK party and the ANC, and then you know, it brings the question then around what these coalitions could look like after these elections. What would the Freedom Front Plus's feelings, if you will, be about an ANC-DA agreement? And I need to clarify this, that this is speculative. We're talking about, as these numbers stand, what are the possible you know, results or agreements that could be set just on the numbers, not on what has been declared by anyone, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's true that that would be a more stable government on the one hand. On the other hand, you then enable the ANC to have a majority government. The ideal from my perspective, and that's just analyzing it, is as a minority government, as I said previously.
Yeah.
Remember, you don't have to form a coalition. You don't have to have 51% of parliament to get a president elected. You just have to have the majority of seats in that election. So if there's 3 candidates and the ANC candidate gets the majority of the vote in parliament for president, then they have the president, they have government. But each vote, they'll need to garner 51% of the seats to get a budget through, to get legislation through, and so forth. And that's going to be an interesting term. What I hear is exactly that's the ANC's thinking, is rather to say, let's make opposition parties and certain parties chairpersons of committees in the legislative side, and let's in that way get legislation through, budgets through, and try to govern in that way, rather than forming a formal coalition. And that might be the ideal at this stage.
Yeah, sure. Very, very interesting. Lessons that you've learned so far. I mean, in how you've spoken to your constituency, what is the Freedom Front Plus introspecting on right now?
There's a lot of introspection that will have to take place, and one will have to go and look at the figures. When did the turning take place? What messaging was ineffective? What was effective? Did we persuade voters and then lost them because we didn't really keep them logistically to get them to the polling stations? Because at the end of the day, an election is more a logistics exercise than anything else at the end. You can convince voters, but you need to get them to the polling station.
Okay.
And it is a lower turnout. So actually all of us, to a large extent, failed to get our electorate out there in the real numbers that we should have. Yeah,
58% turnout. Matala, do you think there's lessons that the Freedom Front Plus should be taking?
Yes, definitely. If they're a party that still wants to survive in the future, they have to do a serious introspection and improve on their campaigning approaches, especially the get out vote technique. People forget that you can, as Wouter pointed out, you can go to someone's house, do a door-to-door campaign, be seen to be within communities and all of that. And I think this is what happened actually with the current governing party. You'd remember in the last few weeks before the elections, they had a very massive and public and visible campaign. But clearly it shows that they were failed by the get out the vote strategy. That is the most important thing. You can campaign, but the effectiveness of your campaign to an extent that it actually forces or actually intrigues someone enough to say, to them waking up at whatever time it is, I'm going to queue and I'm going to ultimately vote for party A. That's where the difference lies. And I think for the VF Plus, same thing applies if they want to survive going beyond 2024.
Yeah, well, one of the provinces where the Freedom Front Plus has held on to their position of top 5 is in the Free State, where they're in 4th place after the ANC, the Democratic Alliance, the EFF, and then the Freedom Front Plus coming in there with 25,000 votes at 3% of the vote in the Free State. We're going to keep analysing these numbers. There's a lot to look at. 9 provinces, and then, of course, the national ballot, and all of these provinces looking reasonably different from one another, which I think makes this election particularly interesting. Thank you so much to our guests. Wouter Wessels, a spokesperson for the Freedom Front Plus. We'll continue on in conversation with Matala Setlhalogile, who is our analyst here at the ROC. We take a